It's often considered a child's dream to be able to grow up and play video games for a living, and what that child doesn't realize at the time, and in fact what most people will never realize, is that the career of an esports athlete is incredibly difficult. When one is trying to make it as an esports athlete, their early career consists of very long hours filled with constant struggles, setbacks, and failures, while getting paid next to nothing. And when one finally makes it, gets signed with a big org, gets salaried, plays in the pro league, the stress and pressure that gets put on them is immense. It's not at all what you think it would be like as a child, and realistically not something many sane people would choose for themselves. You need a certain mental toughness to survive as a player and thrive in the world of esports. So in this episode, that's what we'll be exploring. We'll be showing you how to prepare for the tough road ahead of you, gain that mental toughness, and make the most out of every situation. Welcome to Esports Academy, a podcast and video series where I teach you how to become a pro. We'll be using current research from sports and performance psychology to optimize the road to success, allowing you to unlock your true potential and improve the fastest. Before we get into this episode, just a quick disclaimer, we'll be dedicating another full episode to Tilt, which is similar to this episode but has some key differences, so if you're more interested in that, make sure you look out for it. Now, onto the episode. The path of an esports professional is not easy. It's full of challenges, setbacks, and failures, and to be honest, not a lot of people succeed. And that's just sort of life. If you look around the world, most people in life, especially in highly competitive areas like esports, are the losers. Winners are few and far between. And that's pretty much always true no matter what your definition of success is. For example, in esports, the higher you go and the more you achieve, the lower proportion of people make it. There are far more people in Tier 3 than in Tier 2, same with Tier 2 versus Tier 1. Even within Tier 1, most players have the goal to win a world championship, but only a very small percentage of them actually succeed. This is because esports is, first and foremost, entertainment. In order to create entertainment, you can't have very many people win. So looking at things purely statistically, your chance of succeeding is very low. Any random person is far more likely to fail than to succeed. But at the same time, performance psychology has shown us that there's not a whole lot of natural talent or genetics or things like that involved in succeeding. Rather, the most reliable indicator of someone's chances of success have to do with how much work they put in, such as the number one factor simply being experience or how much practice someone has put in. This essentially means that the vast majority of people can become winners and can succeed given they put enough time and effort into trying to do so. Now, these two things seem counterintuitive. How can most people fail despite most people having the potential to succeed? Well, most people lose their motivation as time goes on. It's sort of the natural thing to do because you have to give up so much simply to keep on practicing and working hard towards a faraway goal and the constant doubt created by failures and losses. Remember, esports are designed to create losers. In order to have winners, you need losers, and to create big winners, you need a lot of losers. This means that in your career, you are far more likely to encounter a lot more setbacks, failures, and losses than you are wins and successes. As those losses pile up, you are slowly reminded again and again that you aren't enough. You aren't there yet. You aren't as far along as you thought you were. It is incredibly demoralizing. This is why it is so important to develop a mindset that can take failures, setbacks, and hardships on the chin and deal with them. Let them motivate you and allow you to keep pushing. Because if you don't, you're guaranteed to be crushed under the weight of an industry that's designed to create losers. So what does a mindset that can take losses on the chin and learn from them look like? Well, a big part of it is simply a focus towards learning and improvement instead of winning and succeeding. I've talked a lot in previous episodes about how if you want to improve the fastest, you have to focus yourself wholly on learning and personal growth. Separate yourself from the outcomes and focus on the process. The good thing about this mindset is that if you're successful at implementing it, it's amazingly powerful at dealing with these setbacks, failures, and upsets because they're usually outcome related. If you truly embrace the mindset of learning and improvement first, bad outcomes are, while still frustrating, not as big of a deal. However, one of the problems that often comes up with this is that since most players trying to make it pro are very invested, they're also very emotional. They get very frustrated and angry when they play poorly or their team doesn't perform up to their expectations, and even very elated when they make an amazing play or win a tough game. When you're very invested in something, emotions usually run high and they often powerfully dictate how you think and act. So these peaks and valleys of our emotions can be problematic when it comes to learning and improvement because they threaten to overwhelm and overtake your original focus. It's really hard to focus on learning when you're pissed off. That's not to say that these emotions are not important or valid, rather that uncontrolled, they can be disruptive to us and our ultimate goal. And so it's really important for us to be able to control these peaks and valleys so that we can maintain our focus on the primary objective of improvement and during tough times maintain our positive mindset. Because doing so actually has a doubly positive effect. If you get into a very emotional situation, like you lose a really important game and are really pissed about it, but you're able to calm down a little bit, sit with that frustration and focus yourself on learning from it, not only will it keep that frustration from disrupting your focus on learning, but it will also use that frustration to increase the amount of learning you take from that situation. You see, our brain has a built-in connection or pathway between emotions and learning. The more emotional you feel in the moment, the more likely the brain is to remember it. This is part of the reason as to why we remember every little detail of our first kiss, or when you hold your child for the first time. Moments in our lives that are accompanied by very strong emotions have a very high likelihood of being ingrained deep into our memories and never forgotten. So if you're in an emotional situation, like a tough loss or an amazing win, and you're able to direct your brain to an important lesson or two from that situation, you can harness the amazing learning power of emotion. When talking about a good attitude, you so often hear about how important losing is and learning from your mistakes, and this is one of the reasons why. Everyone will get frustrated when they keep making mistakes, and when they fail, it universally sucks. But a player with a really good attitude will not let that frustration overpower them. They'll harness it, sit in it, and use it to learn from what made them so frustrated. Really, that's the ultimate goal. Now, this is all well and good in theory. It's easy to say, but how do you actually put it into practice? How can you shrug off a big failure and focus on learning from it? Well, the big secret is that it's a skill, and so it requires practice. And while the best practice might be actually failing and getting into a rough situation, it makes more sense to simply start practicing it right now, so when life kicks you in the gut, you're prepared for it. And life will kick you in the gut. Not many pros made it to where they are today without getting kicked in the gut by life. And I really like the phrase "when life kicks you in the gut" because it's an apt metaphor for showing just how important preparation is. Say you're walking down the street one day and this giant 300-pound guy made of pure muscle walks up to you and says, "Hey, I don't like the way you look, I'm gonna kick you in the gut," and proceeds to kick you in the gut as hard as he can. What do you think is gonna happen? Well, it will probably hurt like hell. You might go flying, break a rib, have some severe bruising, maybe even some internal bleeding, but in a year's time, everything will be healed and you'll just have this really weird story to tell at parties. Now say that same dude sneaks into your house at night and kicks you in the gut as hard as he can while you're sleeping. What happens this time? Well, if you're lucky, you'll get away with some permanent injuries, and if you're not lucky, you probably just die. What's the difference between the two? Well, in the first one, you can see the kick coming, and so your body will naturally and reflexively flex its muscles to help absorb the blow. But in the second, you don't see it coming, and that kick gets to do full damage, likely ruining your internal organs. Your body preparing itself to receive a blow by flexing your muscles when you're about to get kicked in the gut is the thing that keeps you alive in real life. And just like this, if you aren't prepared to metaphorically get kicked in the gut by life, whatever you're trying to protect will die. I know this is sort of a long example, but I wanted to keep it in because the lesson is so important. Life is guaranteed to kick you in the gut, and the only way that you can reliably live through that is to be prepared for when it happens. So how can you prepare for when life kicks you in the gut? Well, the most important thing is to simply accept that it will happen and figure out what you want to do about it. Say to yourself, alright, I know I'm going to face at least one really large setback, but I know that even if that happens, I want to push on and keep trying. I'm willing to start over from scratch if I have to. Think about and visualize yourself in that situation. How would you feel? What would you do? What would the person who you want to be do? And then you can start to develop a plan and strategy for how you want to deal with it when it comes. One of the things that almost always happens in tough fails and rough situations like this is that your emotions dictate how you think, and they tend to make things feel a lot worse than they actually are. This is often what leads to failures being really catastrophic for one's career, because people get overwhelmed by how bad it seems and make poor decisions based on those emotions. So really, the first step is all about emotional regulation. Now, I could make an entire another podcast just on emotional regulation. It's a massive topic and there's tons out there. So I would suggest researching around a little bit and finding something that works for you. Really, you just want some way to avoid being overwhelmed by those negative emotions that accompany a failure. It's okay to feel them strongly, and probably even a good thing to do so, but you want to avoid being overwhelmed by them. Often in these cases, one of the things that leads to being overwhelmed and making rash decisions is that when someone fails, they think that they themselves are a failure as well. It's super important to separate your self-value from the outcomes of your actions. You are not a failure because you failed. In fact, that makes no sense because the most successful people are often those who failed the most. Combining the two like this is something that many people do unconsciously, and so if you're going through a rough situation, just remember to remind yourself that despite the rough situation, the setback or failure, that the only thing that decides whether you will also become a failure is what you do next. It's also important to accept that you failed and accept some level of responsibility for that failure. Often people want to escape the feeling of failing, so they try to blame it on something else or deflect and say things like, well, I didn't really want this anyways, or I wasn't that serious about it, or even, well, my teammates deserve to lose, so I'll help them lose. No matter what the failure looks like, you are at least in part at fault, and taking responsibility for that and learning from it is a really important part of being able to move on from it. In order to really learn from a failure, one must recognize their own role in making it happen. You don't have to accept responsibility for the whole thing, but even picking out one part of it as something you contributed to allows you to take some level of responsibility and highlight something for you to focus on improving for the next time. After that, it's really just about taking a deep breath, looking at things objectively, and figuring out your next steps. Think of exactly what you need to do in order to get back to where you want to be, how you're going to accomplish those things, and ideally how long you want to give yourself to accomplish them. If you ever find yourself thinking that you can't do it or can't make it after one of these setbacks, look up some failure stories. There are thousands and thousands of stories of people who have likely had much worse setbacks than you and made great successes out of them. Sometimes all you need is a little bit of inspiration. Really, preparing for hardships is all about accepting that they are going to come at one point or another and visualizing how the person that you want to be would handle them. That is how you can turn your greatest setbacks into your biggest learning experiences and leaps forward towards your ultimate goal. Now, we talked a lot about failures and setbacks in this episode, so let's take a moment to recap. First, remember that you are going to fail and face setbacks because that is simply how the industry is built, and so setting up a mindset to be able to preserve and learn through them is of vital importance. One important aspect of this mindset is to focus on learning from every situation, to separate the outcomes from the process and drive your attention to learning and improving instead of winning. In order to overcome the initial knee-jerk reactions that accompany failure and setbacks, it's also important to prepare for them. Think and visualize how you would react when you do inevitably hit rough patches. And when you do hit them, make sure you remind yourself that failing does not make you a failure. Take responsibility for that failure and create an action plan with how to move forward. There is a direct correlation between how many times somebody has failed at something and how successful they are at it. If you want to reach the top, you need to be prepared to fail and hit setbacks, to create a mental toughness in yourself to learn from the failures and improve yourself. Only then can you fully realize your potential and take the next step towards going pro. Hey everyone, thanks so much for checking out the Esports Academy podcast. If you enjoyed, make sure you follow or subscribe or do whatever you do on your platform of choice and share it with anyone else that you think might find it helpful or interesting. In the next episode, we'll be looking at practice environment and how you can set up for success. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.